Welcome to Political Therapy. I am your host, Nicholas Villa. Political Therapy is an online radio program focused on explaining politics and healing society. Pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. Welcome to our first episode in 2020. So glad you're tuned in. I'm also glad that this independent online radio program is still going strong. This year's first episode in English is episode 4, titled Ugly Betty at Dabeiba.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh. Our guest is Eric Fair, Army veteran who worked as a contract interrogator at Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq, as well as other places. He's the author of the new book, Consequence, a Memoir. You've said that what happened outside Abu Ghraib, what contractors did in terms of torture, was often worse than inside Abu Ghraib.
That was certainly my experience, and again, I'm focusing on my own sort of behavior and my own sort of actions. So for me, yes, personally, Fallujah was worse than Abu Ghraib.
So why don't you read for us from your book, Consequence?
We passed by the interrogation room where Tyner has been working on Rad Hussein. We haven't heard Tyner scream or throw anything today. The door to the room, a flimsy sheet of plywood, has blown open in the hot desert wind. Inside, Rad Hussein is bound to the Palestinian chair. His hands are tied to his ankles. The chair forces him to lean forward in a crouch, forcing all of his weight onto his thighs. It's as if he's been trapped in the act of kneeling down to pray. His knees frozen just above the floor, his arms pinned below his legs. He is blindfolded. His head has collapsed into his chest. He wheezes and gasps for air. There's a pool of urine at his feet. He moans, too tired to cry, but in too much pain to remain silent. Henson comes out into the hallway and walks past the room. He covers the side of his face as he walks by, and he says, "I don't even want to know. I am silent. This is a sin. I know it as soon as I see it. There will be no atonement for it. In the coming years, I won't have the audacity to seek it." Witnessing a man being tortured in the Palestinian chair requires the witness to either seek justice or cover his face. Like Henson in Fallujah, I'll spend the rest of my life covering my face.
Somewhat recent cases of torture in international politics have called for their own examination through psychoanalysis. Now, given the particularity or the particular heinous specificities of the atrocities that were committed, information detailing what occurred in Abu Ghraib prison in Baghdad, where American soldiers tortured Iraqi war prisoners, reached the public sphere. American authorities were curious, or what I mean to say is that American authorities' reaction was curious, to say the least. First, President George W. Bush alleged the infamous, I hate that excuse, the infamous rotten apples excuse. I'm fed up with that excuse. Therefore implying that the scenic staging of poses, disguises, and psychological and physical humiliation that American soldiers incurred in and carried out on Iraqi prisoners had nothing to do with American values. Another strange excuse came in the form of an argument, justifying these atrocities in improper training. According to American authorities, the soldiers had not been properly taught the Geneva Convention. Of course, this excuse is even more troubling and only reinforces the argument that psychological torture, humiliation, sadism, masochism, and debasing attitudes towards the other are an integral part of American culture. Because basically, if one has to be taught not to blow one's nose with, I don't know, say a tablecloth, it is ultimately because one is, quite used to doing so. As a citizen of the US, I have to admit that I was not surprised by what went on in Abu Ghraib prison. I mean, sadly, I wasn't surprised at all. I mean, I know American MO in foreign territories, as well as in perhaps even the U.S. itself, with its own prison and prison population, inmate population, and so on and so on. Now, I have to say that I was also not surprised, as a citizen of Colombia, when news of a mass grave containing the buried bodies of victims of extrajudicial killings carried out by the Colombian state and its paramilitary allies in a small village named Dabeiba appeared in local media. Just like Abu Ghraib gives a glimpse into American culture, what authorities and the media found out at the grave in Dabeiba offers an inside look into Colombian culture.
Colombian authorities are calling this landfill outside Medellin the largest urban mass grave in the world. This is the site where prosecutors believe victims of the Colombian civil conflict were buried 10 to 15 years ago. Banners with the pictures of the missing were shown Monday during a ceremony marking the beginning of excavations to find the victims.
Sentimientos encontrados, ¿cierto?
I have mixed feelings about this victim's relative says. On the one hand, this gives us hope in a sea of impunity. On the other hand, it's also painful because it makes us think of the ones we lost. Colombian authorities say nearly 100 victims could be buried at the landfill. Human rights organizations say the figure could be as high as 300.
Es la posibilidad de reparar simbólicamente.
This is about honoring the victims' relatives' right to know the truth, Colombian Interior Minister Juan Fernando Cristo said. Our goal is to begin here in Medellin and replicate this throughout Colombia. Authorities chose this site for excavation after hearing eyewitness statements from several former paramilitary hitmen who are now in prison. During the worst years of the Colombian Civil War, two leftist rebel groups, right-wing paramilitaries, and government forces fought each other. Officials believe hundreds of thousands of people were killed in the conflict during the last half-century.
The Colombian government and its subsidiary power structure has also reacted in a telling way to the inclusion of their atrocities in the public sphere. Their typical reaction to their own crimes was once again present, this time of course in the argument that goes a bit in the following, or that follows this logic. Yes, what we do is bad, but the other side, FARC leftist guerrillas, also did bad things, right? So that's the typical Colombian right-wing argument. There is never an acceptance of wrongdoing, but basically a rhetorical escape to, the other side also does bad things. This argument has always raised my curiosity, precisely because the Colombian establishment is obsessed with the judicial differentiation between the state its army, and the Marxist guerrillas. So here there's an ideological, let's say, scheme or system at place in the Colombian right wing, because on the one side they insist that they can do bad things because the other side also does bad things, but simultaneously they're obsessed with not being equated to those awful, terrible criminal rebels. So it's really a very hypocritical position. Also, it is a position that goes against the logic of the state. It is much worse when a policeman kills a civilian than when a civilian kills a policeman. Because when a policeman kills a civilian, the whole symbolic authority that the state, on which the state supports itself, is suddenly destroyed. This is, of course, something that's also very present in America, especially through the racism or the cases of racism that have been showing up from police authorities. The police who do these things might not be aware of the huge harm they're doing authority itself, their own authority. So my guess is that when policemen go to all black neighborhoods because of their own debasement of their own authority, they're probably not going to be respected. I mean, they're going to have power, and their power will be respected, but they won't have any authority in themselves, basically. They will basically become just another armed group, another gang in control or seeking to control that territory, but not really the authority above all gangs, because they undermine their authority every time they behave in an openly or not openly racist manner. In any case, what seems to offend Colombian power the most is the legal equality between them and their rivals. This equalization of both parties enrages the members of the Colombian elite and their supporters, since they still believe that holding public power entails the privilege of breaking the law. Of course, this is completely contradictory and completely against reason, but nonetheless, they still cling to this crazy idea. Ultimately, they consider that they are above the law because they are the state. And this is a gross miscalculation, because by all means, you are not above the law when you are the state. When you are the state, you are the law, and therefore you must obey the law. Of course, all this attitude achieves is to undermine the state's own power. Like I have already mentioned, when a civilian kills a policeman, a life is taken. When a policeman kills a civilian, a life is taken, and the symbolic power of the law also ceases to exist. This is the logic of state abuse of power. The more the state violates its own law, the more its power is diminished. Colombian traditional power still has not realized the simple logic. Another reaction to the mass grave at Dabeiba has been utter silence, and the intent to shut down any initiatives to clarify what went on, particularly on behalf of former President Uribe and many high-ranking members of the armed forces. It is difficult to call oneself a hero, a fighter for the Colombian motherland, and a guarantor of national security while killing innocent Colombians, which is precisely what the Colombian armed forces have done in a systematic manner. Of course, the real rotten apples are some actual patriots who consider the whole thing heinous and denounce these practices. There are also whistleblowers who go to the media to expose these sort of atrocities. However, these are actually, so to speak, the bad apples, because they're persecuted and they're ostracized and sometimes even assassinated. They incur and they undergo a huge risk when they denounce these awful practices. By these awful practices, I mean the innocent killing of civilians by the Colombian army. However, can the Colombian army nonetheless call itself a hero or the guardian of security or the protector of Colombian children while they do all this? Can that really happen? And here we can refer back to Abu Ghraib, because just like Abu Ghraib resonates with American high school and college culture, bullying, hazing, these sort of practices, Dabeiba resonates with Colombian customs. It is telling that Abu Ghraib-style American torture was carried out on foreigners, and are not the losers in American high school foreign to the cool, popular kids. I remember my days in American high school, and you really had like these two opposite tribes. This really oppressed group of students, and while you had like sort of these other group that really sort of seemed to enjoy everything life had to offer, while the other group, the people who were bullied and hazed and so on, just went to school to sort of suffer and to sort of try to not get, a good day would be a day where they didn't suffer too much. For the other tribe, these cool, popular kids, it seemed that every day would be a good day. So again, I see very much of a resonance. If that's the correct word, if it's not, I'm sorry, but I see a huge similarity between that sort of, or that social disposition and what went on in Abu Ghraib, right? In Dabeiba, however, something different occurred, because Colombian state agents tortured and assassinated other Colombians, and moreover innocent ones, for the purpose of achieving supposedly higher security indicators. So basically, here's how the Colombian state, of course, right-wing state and right-wing army and right-wing government, saw the whole thing. For them, security was a matter of assassinations, and the more assassinations that took place, the safer Colombians were supposed to feel. So, if Abu Ghraib was present in American high school movies and series, Dabeiba was present in that sitcom called Ugly Betty. Of course, in Spanish, its original version, which is Colombian, it's called Yo soy Betty la Fea. Basically, I am Ugly Betty. So it's curious because that show was translated to 25 different languages and aired in 180 countries. And here, the question arises: are the selected executions of innocent civilians in Dabeiba not the reflection of the class struggle present in Yo soy Betty la Fea, or Ugly Betty? The proper name for the program should not have been Ugly Betty, but Poor Betty, since all of Betty's ugly friends have one thing in common. They are poor. They share that quality with the corpses in Dabeiba's mass grave. Now, please remember that when I analyze this program, Ugly Betty, I analyzed the original version aired in Colombia and so on and so forth, not the American or any other international version, but the original version, Yo Soy Betty la Fea, which still airs in Colombia. And not least because it dares to address Colombia's evident class struggle. Much like caste culture, Betty can only be the love object of the show's gallant Don Armando, which is, of course, Don, D-O-N, in Spanish means from a noble origin. So she can only really be his love object once she looks, she speaks, and she can afford the part of love object. Basically, she undergoes a huge transformation, enabled to be an acceptable love object for a man of a higher caste, or of the higher caste, because there are only really two. So in consequence, there is no authentic reconciliation between the two castes. Betty must abandon her lower caste and enter the upper caste in order to be loved by a fellow member of the upper caste. This is precisely what those buried in Dabeiba never managed to do. And now, they're dead. So, having said all that I have said during this episode, one of the words that generate the biggest repudiation in traditional Colombian power and its current political situation is the word polarization, which of course is very similar to American, or what is understood in the US by galvanization. And of course, this is to some degree expected, since Colombian power is clearly in negation. In the third most unequal country in the world, where the lives of the poor are considered less important than a couple of days off. And I say this because many soldiers would shoot or have shot innocent civilians in Colombia, murdered innocent civilians in Colombia, just to have some more days off, because that's, it was an incentive. There was an incentive to kill from the top. Nonetheless, Colombian government and Colombian right-wing thought and ideology considers that there are really no reasons to take sides in the Colombian conflict. One should, of course, not fall into their negation. The sides, the poles, are clearly there. And of course we have to take part. And of course we have to denounce these crimes. And of course these sort of things cannot be tolerated. Be it at Dabeiba, be it at Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo, or anywhere else in the world.
Bye.